Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Toll House Inn, Lancaster. The best footballer you've never heard of. Almost universally considered the greatest defender England has ever produced by those who saw him play, he was a football superstar in the 40s and 50s, but his name has never taken its rightful place amongst other football legends of our time. Capped by England's 27 times, setting a record for consecutive appearances, he sent shockwaves through the British game when he left Britain for Bogota in 1950, just months before England was set to make their World Cup debut in Brazil. Whilst England proceeded to be humiliated by the United States in South America, trying out 11 inferior centre-halves over the next 4 years and suffering 2 devastating defeats at the hands of the Hungarians, football in England would never be the same again. A star is born in Shelton. January 24, 1922 was the day that Cornelius Franklin was born in Shelton, Staffordshire, but there was no footballing lineage in the Franklin family, nor was there a sporting one. As a youngster, Neil played no more football and showed no greater enthusiasm for the game than the average schoolboy growing up in England at that time. What's more, when Neil did play, whether with his friends or at school, his ability drew little note. His progress was largely down to hard work and graft, and as such, it was very steady. He was rather short for a centre-half as a schoolboy, so he played inside forward. As an early developer, Neil was very well built for his age, which is a huge plus in schoolboy football, even more so in the 20th century. And although Neil never wanted to rely on his strength or physique, always striving to improve his technique and understanding of the game, it undoubtedly helped him at this stage of his life. As the years passed, Neil's game improved and he began to set himself apart from other boys and broke into his school team, Cannon Street School in Hanley, where he was made captain. First steps. Selection for the local Hanley boys team followed, and it wasn't long before Neil was chosen for the Stoke boys team. Following his trinity of school, local and regional team selection, Neil was asked to play in the schoolboys' international trial, which was a natural progression, but it was here that Neil's progress would hit its first hurdle. The 15-year-old was selected to play for the Midlands against the North at York, and although he had been playing centre forward, he was told to play inside right that day. Neil put in a solid, if not spectacular, performance and left the field with his head held high, but wasn't surprised to learn he had missed out on international schoolboy honours to the North's inside right. His opposite number was the best player on the pitch, mesmerising the Midlands team defence, beating players at will and playing with an intelligence far beyond his years. Standing at just 4 foot 11 inches, he was the smallest player on either side, but he was a wonderful technician who went by the name of, can anybody guess? Leonard Shackleton. Cannon Street School Games Master. Neil's game progression is owed in no small part to the Games Master at Cannon Street, Arthur Tams, who devoted time to improving his game. Arthur coached both the school team and Hanley boys, and Neil described the extra training he did with Arthur as being hard and often tedious work, but he was happy to go over the basics time and time again in his quest to become a professional. Arthur recommended Neil to Stoke City about getting a job on the ground staff at the Victoria Ground, but they already had the maximum boys, so he approached David Duddle, a director and fan of the club, who gave him a job. During this time, from the age of 14 to 17, Neil would train Tuesday and Thursday evening, as well as playing on Saturday, plus some midweek matches. When it came to the weekend, Neil would play in Stoke's third team, and very occasionally the reserve team. Could Neil have gone to Manchester United? In 1938, aged 16, Neil made his debut for the reserve team for Stoke against Bury in the highly competitive Central League. Watching him in action was Lewis Rocker, one of the greatest talent spotters football has ever known, who was largely responsible for creating Manchester United. His greatest legacy, though, was the work he did as a scout, founding the Manchester United Junior Athletic Club, bringing in future United greats such as Johnny Carey, Stan Pearson and Charlie Mitten. And then in 1945, he convinced his chairman, James William Gibson, to appoint Matt Busby to the top job at Old Trafford. When United won the FA Cup in 1948, 7 of the starting 11 were brought to the club by Rocker. Lewis Rocker predicted a great future for the 16-year-old Franklin, who took a lot of confidence from the great man's remarks. 6 wasted years, 1939 to 45. Neil Franklin was just 17 when the Germans invaded Poland and the war began. In 1941, then of the required age, Franklin joined the RAF and he was posted to Blackpool, where he played for the Blackpool Services 11 alongside Stan Mortons, who played in the Lancashire combination, which they won in 2 out of the 3 seasons in which it ran. After 5 months in Blackpool, Franklin moved on to Hereford, where he trained as a physical training instructor, a PTI, a common role for footballers during the war. Another 5 months passed and he moved again, this time to Weston-super-Mare, to take a flight mechanics course, and throughout this time Neil was working hard on his game, and his ability was not going unnoticed by the RAF selectors, who selected him for the service representative sides. By 1944, he was being suggested for the England team, but Neil knew that Stan Cullis was England's centre-half, but then Stan was posted overseas, and Neil was selected for an FA 11 to play the Army at Park Avenue Stadium in Bradford on December 9, 1944. In the star-studded team was Len Shackleton, who had deprived Neil all those years before of an England schoolboy cap, as well as Stan Mortons, and the match ended in a 1-1 draw, but he received positive comments. The now 23-year-old had convinced the FA selectors, as a month later he made his England debut at Villa Park against Scotland in a 3-2 win, but didn't receive a cap as it was a wartime international, and when the national anthem was played he was so proud that he shed tears. In total, Neil appeared in 12 wartime internationals, but none of those were met with official caps, and for Stoke City he made 194 appearances between the Football League being suspended in 1939 and resuming in 1946. Focus on the FA Cup. The 1945-46 season was a transitional one with a regional format for the Football League, so it was decided that the FA Cup should be immediately reinstated. The importance of the FA Cup, making its return after 6 years, grew further, and it was particularly evident at the Victoria Ground, where McGrory began resting his star men in league games to ensure their freshness and fitness for the Cup. Confidence was high, with wins against Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday and Burnley, securing their route to the quarter-finals. The Potters hadn't reached the semi-finals since 1899, and there was a feel-good factor around Staffordshire when City drew Bolton Wanderers. For this season only, the Football Association had introduced a two-legged system for every round of the Cup in order to increase club revenues. The Victoria Ground had been expected to set its record attendance for the visit of Bolton, but a bitterly cold Saturday saw them fall just short of the record as 50,735 fans crammed into the Vic. The game was won by the brilliance of two Bolton players, goalkeeper Stan Anderson, who performed heroics, and England's Ray Westwood, who scored in each half to secure a 2-0 victory. Westwood was a prolific and a wonderful inside forward. Born in the Black Country, who spent 19 years at Bolton, was the uncle of future Manchester United and England wing half Duncan Edwards, and they both shared a rare genius on the pitch, but they would sadly both also be involved in two of the game's greatest tragedies. The Burnham Park disaster. On March 9, 1946, with stands already heaving with fans, enormous numbers gathered outside as queues continued to grow. Roughly 15 minutes prior to kick-off, a frightened 12-year-old boy convinced his father that they ought to leave the ground. The boy's father, Norman Crook, eventually found a route out, picking the lock of an exit gate using one of his own screw keys. Unfortunately, whilst the boy and his father escaped, the gate was used by fans as a way in, and hundreds forced their entry. After 5 minutes play, the referee, George Dutton, brought the game to a halt, and once the pitch had been cleared, play resumed, but not for long, as 5 minutes later, Mr. Dutton halted play again. People had been fainting up to an hour before the game, but Neil's friend, Dennis Herod, Stoke's goalkeeper, said later, "I'd served in North Africa, Italy and Normandy, and I had seen plenty of dead people. I knew those fans hadn't fainted, they were dead." Nat Lofthouse heard a policeman telling the referee, "I believe those people are dead," whilst pointing to bodies strewn by the side of the pitch. Gruesome facts of a game that didn't matter anymore. When the players left the field at 12 minutes past 3, doctors had already put the estimated death toll at 28. It would be 20 minutes before Mr. Dutton re-entered the Stoke dressing room to tell the players that Bolton's Chief Constable, William Howard, had ordered the game to continue, a controversial decision, with Stan Matthews saying later he was absolutely sickened that the game went on. There was no public address system at Burnham Park, and it was feared that an abandonment of the game after 10 minutes could lead to unrest, with potentially further incidents and deaths. The players could not wait for the game to end, and Franklin said, "No longer was this game in which Stoke had to battle against a 2-goal deficit, and it was now a mere formality that we complete the 90 minutes, and to hell with the result. No one wanted to score, let alone win." 33 people died. Over 500 were injured, making it the deadliest accident at a sporting event in British history, and would remain as so until 1971, when exactly twice as many people were killed in the second Ibrox disaster. An estimated 85,000 attended the match at a time when Berners Park capacity was 60,000. MP Mr Hughes' report fell on deaf ears as neither the FA, the government or club chairman acted strongly. 70 years later, in 2016, a permanent memorial plaque in memory of the dead was unveiled at the University of Bolton Stadium, with a spokesman saying it was no longer the forgotten disaster. First season back after World War II. On August 31st, 1946, the Football League returned after a 7-year absence, and Stoke City drew a crowd of 32,335 to the Victoria Ground to see a 2-2 draw with Charlton Athletic. They made a dreadful start to the season, losing the next 3 games, but in mid-September they won 6 matches on the trot to take them into the upper reaches of the First Division. External factors threatened to halt this run when the Players' Union threatened strike action, as the post-war attendance boom was pouring a lot of money into the game, and the pockets of club directors and the players wanted their share. The crisis was averted when the government stepped in to appease both the Football League and the Players' Union, but another crisis loomed as Matthews had missed 6 matches with injury, and there was divided opinion in Stoke regarding the great man, as it was considered his best days were behind him, and a fee of £20,000 was suggested when the British record was 14,500. Neil, the club captain, called a team meeting and asked the players if anyone had refused to play with Stan. They all said no, so Franklin wrote to Stan to tell him they were all behind him, as well as releasing a statement to the public. Arctic weather, but who remembers? Stoke were still in the top 4 when they played Liverpool on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. A fine performance at home saw Stoke win 2-1, courtesy of 2 goals from Freddie Steele, from crosses by Matthews. But next day at Anfield, a late strike by Albert Stubbins gave Liverpool both points. The winter of 46-47 was one of the harshest ever experienced in Britain, where the highest temperature recorded in February 1947 was 5 degrees centigrade, with the ferry service across the English Channel being suspended due to pack ice, and entire villages were cut off, with the RAF delivering ration packs to them. As the situation worsened, roads were cut off, coal was stuck at the pits, and the country began a devastating fuel shortage which hit industry so hard 4 million people claimed unemployment benefits. Buckingham Palace, the Houses of Parliament and London's Central Electricity Board worked by candlelight, and the heaviest snow came in March with 7 foot of snow in County Durham, and things didn't improve when a thaw set in as all major rivers across Britain burst their banks. Many football matches were postponed, and it saw the longest football season in history, with the season dragging on 5 weeks longer than planned. Did this decision affect the Championship? Following defeat in the FA Cup, 1-0 to Sheffield United, Stoke thrashed Chelsea 6-1, and then victory over Arsenal left Stoke 3 points off top spot, with 2 games in hand. The Potters were coming into form at the right time and faced league leaders Wolves, who were in shaky form, but it was a long afternoon at Molineux when Stoke crashed 3-0, marking the beginning of a dreadful march for the Potters. As the country suffered heavy flooding, Stoke's title hopes were in danger of sinking, but April would be busy and brilliant. They played 6 games in 22 days and won every one of them. All may have looked rosy in Staffordshire, but despite 7 consecutive wins, there was another storm brewing as Stan Matthews was set for his 3rd major conflict with Bob McGrory and the Stoke City board, and this one would prove to be his last. McGrory told Stan he was in the team for the game against Blackpool, but 30 minutes before kick-off, kit donned and ready to come up against the players he trained alongside day to day, McGrory popped his head round the door to tell Stan he had changed his mind and he was dropping him. Some thought the manager was jealous of Stan and the limelight which followed him, whilst others thought he had a legitimate case for selling the now 32-year-old England international. The board decided Stan would be allowed to leave Stoke after 17 years with the club. Ecstasy and agony in final day heartbreak for Stoke City. Stan was asked where his destination of choice would be, and he replied naturally, Blackpool. After prolonged negotiations, with the deal seemingly off more than once, Stoke finally decided to accept Blackpool's offer of 11,500, and the deal was sealed while Stan was in Glasgow representing a Great Britain 11 in a 6-1 win over a rest of Europe 11. It is said that the deal was clinched when the Blackpool manager sweetened the deal by giving McGrory a bottle of whiskey. Liverpool were top of the league with 57 points, 2 points ahead of Stoke, but the Potters had a far superior goal average, which meant Stoke had to win their final match away at Sheffield United to be crowned champions of England for the first time in the club's history. In torrid conditions, Stoke desperately needed some inspiration or a piece of magic, but their magician had departed to Blackpool and Sheffield United hung on for a 2-1 victory. Neil Franklin didn't sit on the fence when asked about Stan's sale a few years later, stating, "If Stan had not been sold to Blackpool in 1947, I am absolutely sure Stoke City would have won the First Division Championship." Goalkeeper Dennis Herrod was damning about the sale. McGrory's jealousy of Stan's fame cost Stoke the championship. He said, he sold a world-class player, and we lost the match against Sheffield without him. McGrory always wanted the limelight for himself and was jealous of players like Stan Matthews and Neil Franklin. Ironically, Stoke were relegated to the 2nd Division in April 1953, a week before Stan Matthews lifted the FA Cup with Blackpool. McGrory had resigned in May 1952. The art of defending. Neil Franklin said, "A centre-half is a member of a football team, and he should, therefore, be as good a footballer as anyone else in the team. Plus, any lout can knock a man off the ball, but it takes a footballer to take the ball off an opponent and then beat others, either by dribbling or passing the ball correctly." Neil was a supremely intelligent footballer. His reading of the game and positional awareness was second to none. Neil's views may seem extreme, even to the modern fan, never mind one in the 40s, 50s or 60s. Of course, the criticism of such a standpoint is that Neil Franklin talks from an extremely rare position as one of the finest ball-playing defenders the game has ever known, ultimately becoming the finest centre-half in Europe. Finney, Matthews, Wright, The Times, The Guardian and the Daily Express all put Franklin in the greatest or dream England 11s, and maybe what it shows is that Neil Franklin is a grossly underrated and forgotten star of the game. The WN formation would remain the choice of football teams in England for around 30 years until Hungary brutally exposed exposed its rigidity and flaws with 2 victories, 6-3 and 7-1. Franklin said, at one time you chose a top centre-half and built a team around him. Today it is the opposite. It has become a position anyone can fill, even for players who are at the end of their careers, which is the death of the ball-playing centre-half. England's first choice. After Stanley Matthews moved to Blackpool in May 1947, Stoke City went into decline, but Franklin retained his place in the England team. In 47-48, playing against Belgium 5-2, Wales 3-0, Northern Ireland 2-2, Sweden 4-2, and Italy, who were the world champions, they beat 4-0. On May 16, 1948, England travelled to Turin to play Italy, the world champions, and this team handed out a football lesson to the Italians. Swift of Manchester City captain, Scott, Don Howe, Wright of Wolves, Franklin of Stoke, Coburn of Man United, Matthews, Mortensen, Lawton, Mannion and Finney, the finest team that England have ever picked. Outstanding for England were Swift, Franklin and Mortensen. Stories in the dressing room may be led to a disastrous decision. Franklin, like all top professionals, earned £12 a week in the season and £10 in the summer, plus £2 win and £1 draw bonuses, with a £750 benefit every 5 years. On international duty, Neil heard his friends say that some clubs offered illegal cash inducements and jobs that didn't exist in an attempt to fool the authorities. Other legal methods of persuading players to join or stay with the club included setting them up in a business or finding them lucrative part-time jobs. Stoke City did not do any of these things, and Neil wanted to go to another club that did so at the start of the 48-49 season. He asked for a transfer, but they refused, so he was forced to stay in Stoke. Neil told his friend Tom Finney, "You know, Tom, we're at the top of the tree, and clubs are making a fortune off people who want to see us play. We should be getting more of that money. It's a scam." On April 15, 1950, Franklin played in his 27th international game against Scotland that England won 1-0, and a few days later he announced that he was leaving Stoke City to play for the Independiente Santa Fe club in Colombia, and rumours suggested that Neil and his colleagues George Mountford had been promised £3,500 each, plus £170 a match and free accommodation. It ended where it began, victory over the Scots. His first wartime appearance had come against Scotland, and so too had his final peacetime one. In total, Neil won 27 official caps, never being dropped, and accounting for wartime games, that figure rises to 39, again, never being dropped. In his 27 peacetime outings, England won 20, drew 3 and lost 4, scoring 92 goals, conceding 28, which gave a win percentage of 75%, which shows Neil was part of a successful England side, and you might struggle to find another international with as impressive a record over a similar number of games. Neil Franklin was an absolute constant and class act in England's defence after World War II. Ruling himself out of the finals in Brazil was like a knife to the heart of the FA then. Journalist and author Norman Giller wrote, "Now England had lost their linchpin with the World Cup just weeks away. It put the England selectors in a dither as to whom to play in the vital centre-half role. This, in an era before the two central back system and everything revolved around the pivotal position of the number 5 shirt. And Neil Franklin was the best by a country mile. England had lost their anchor and would soon be all at sea. This was no exaggeration. The ball is mightier than the sword. Home to part of the Amazon rainforest, vast grasslands and both Pacific and Caribbean coastlines, Colombia is an extraordinary country. However, its outstanding geographical beauty could not be more firmly at odds with the brutality and violence which has plagued much of the nation's history. On April 9, 1948, a day after Neil played arguably his finest game for England in a 2-0 win over Scotland at Hampden Park, George Galton, Liberal Party leader, was gunned down in Bogota, and in the 10 hours that followed, 5,000 people died. His assassination sparked immediate outrage and violence, and the civil war, which officially spanned 10 years, but some have claimed it lasted more than 5 decades, 50 years, as well as leading to the creation of a national league and the introduction of professional football in Colombian football. Luis Robledo, son of a millionaire cattle rancher, had been one of the founders of Independiente Santa Fe in 1941. He was educated in England at Cambridge University and began to take an interest in football as a supporter of Arsenal, and he took their colours for Santa Fe. After Cambridge, he became the first secretary at the Colombian Embassy in London. Controversially, in 1948, he married Lady Bridget Poulet, daughter of Earl William Poulet. Well-dressed and well-spoken, Robledo would soon be calling the shots at Santa Fe and began to plan a raid of English talent, and was soon eyeing up an unsettled centre-half at Stoke City. 6 games for Santa Fe. 6 games. That's all it was for Neil Franklin at Santa Fe. A transfer which rocked the British game, resulted in only 9 hours of football on Colombian soil. By the end of 1949, Neil and Luis Robledo had started to correspond, and the former Cambridge University student had assured Neil he would face no obstacles in leaving Stoke City, and he promised a great deal in his letters to Neil, from vast riches to spring-like weather all year round. The money offered was a topic of great interest, but Charlie Mitten received a £5,000 signing-on fee, £5,000 a year wages plus bonuses, and it's thought that Neil's deal was the same. Neil told Robledo to sign Charlie Mitten, who was in the USA on tour with Manchester United. When Mitten told Busby, he supposedly asked, "Do they want a manager?" When Mitten told him the wages before saying, "OK, they'd better go then, or you'll die wondering," that Matt Busby would crucify Mitten when he returned to United a year later. By the time Neil boarded the plane for Bogota, they had been in contact for 6 months. Robledo had guaranteed Vera first-class medical care. The baby would be British, so Neil had no reason to distrust him, a grave error in judgment by Neil. The flight on Sunday, May 5th, 1950, went from London Airport, Shannon in Ireland, Goose Bay in Canada, New York Idlewild, Miami, Cuba, Kingston, Jamaica, Barranquilla in Colombia, finally Bogota on Tuesday the 7th of May. In a game against Millonarios that ended 0-0, Neil dominated Alfredo Di Stefano, and his opinion of many of the players from South America was dismissive, as he said the standard was like the 2nd or 3rd division back home. Ultimately, it would be the incompetence, broken promises and inability by the Santa Fe officials that would cost them their famous English centre-half. Of course, Neil and his fellow Bogota bandits ought to have been more diligent in their research. Let down by Santa Fe. The greatest mistruth that Luis Robledo ever told Neil Franklin was that there would be no question marks regarding the nationality of his child should he or she be born in Colombia. Neil's wife Vera was deeply unhappy in Bogota, and it was the news that the child could be claimed as Colombian that finally convinced both Neil and Vera that the baby would be born in Stoke. This deception alone could have been enough to convince Neil to cut short his misbegotten South American adventure, but he was keen to see out his contract with Santa Fe, so he contacted the club to say Vera and Gary would like to return home. Much to his relief, Santa Fe seemed understanding, agreeing to arrange flights home, as well as allowing Neil to accompany them as far as New York. The journey went smoothly, but there was bad news waiting for them as they were told that no reservations had been made for Vera and Gary on the flight to London. Neil telephoned Luis Robledo, telling him in no uncertain terms that he wouldn't be returning to Santa Fe until his family were fixed up with a flight to England. Robledo pleaded with Neil to return for the game at the weekend, as his reputation depended on it, which Neil replied, "I don't give two hoots about your reputation." Should we be surprised at football officials lying? Vera was quite depressed and unwell in New York, so Neil said, "I was so annoyed at the way I had been let down over Vera's trip home, worried about her health and disgusted about the lies I had been told, that I made my mind up on the spur of the moment to fly back to London." Charlie Mitten said, Santa Fe officials were furious when news reached Bogota that Franklin had returned to England, and for weeks afterwards, private detectives followed me and George Mountford everywhere, as many things were said about Englishmen breaking their word, and the British consul was concerned, saying British prestige was at stake. In the space of 2 months, Neil Franklin had made 2 cataclysmic moves, both of which had caused uproar in the nation he was leaving, and both leading to some less than complimentary words being written about him. The impact of his departure from Bogota was seismic, and actually led to Luis Robledo resigning and leaving the game for good, retreating to his business interests up until his death in Bogota in 1987, aged 63. All this could have been resolved quite simply if Robledo had booked a flight to London for Vera and Gary, and I'm not sure why he didn't do it. Facing the music. When the Potters kicked off the 1950-51 season with a defeat at home to Newcastle United, Neil spent the day fishing, and less than a week later, on August 25th, he received a letter from Stanley Rouse, Secretary of the Football Association since 1934, which said, "I'm writing to inform you that for leaving their clubs while under contract and for playing in the unaffiliated football in Bogota in contravention of the Football Association, Football League and club rules and regulations, the following players are suspended forthwith: Neil Franklin, Stoke City; W.C. Higgins, Everton; Charlie Mitten, Manchester United; C.F. Mountford, Stoke City. The suspensions must remain effective until the players apply to this association for and are granted reinstatement." Neil was naturally disappointed but not surprised. However, 2 days later, Vera gave birth to the second child, Elizabeth Franklin, who was born at Haven Nursing Home in Port Hill on August 23, 1950. The finest English defender of his generation had been banished into the footballing wilderness, but Neil got his head down and worked hard on his fitness and his game, like he always had at the police recreation ground. was an attitude typical of Neil Franklin, who described his adventure as a ghastly mistake. The terrible reality. His friend Stan Matthews later pointed out, at first all went well, but Santa Fe were never forthcoming with the money they had promised. The country was very unstable politically, and at 6:30 p.m. a street curfew fueled anxieties, forcing Neil and his family to return to England after 2 months, having received only 1 week's wages and no signing on fee. Neil only played 6 games in Colombia and was banned in Britain by the Football League and the Football Association, and was unable to play for Stoke City or England. The ban was eventually lifted, and in February 1951 he was sold to second division club Hull City for $22,500, at the time a world record fee for a defender. Franklin suffered a serious knee ligament injury and missed the second half of the 51-52 season, and then another injury meant he hardly played any games in the 52-53 season. Sadly, he never recovered from these injuries and moved to Crewe Alexandra in February 1956, and this was followed by brief spells at Stockport County and Mansfield Town. Neil retired from playing football in 1957 and managed several London League clubs before joining 3rd Division Colchester United in 1964, winning promotion in 1966, but then relegation in 1968, and he was sacked, and then he moved into a pub called the Dog and Doublet in Sandon, Staffordshire. A bit of a charade. October 2nd, 1950 was the date set for the joint FA Football League inquiry into the case of Neil Franklin, who didn't expect to get off scot-free, but he did find the whole thing a bit of a charade. The inquiry took place at the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, and it felt a bit like he was back at school, as 8 representatives from the FA and Football League gave him a good telling off, like a 28-year-old naughty schoolboy, before dishing out an almost certainly pre-arranged punishment. The next day, Neil received a letter from Stanley Rouse with a 4-month suspension, and Stoke City said it would be better if we parted company. The tragedy of the whole situation was that it could so easily have been avoided. Neil had been naive. He should have journeyed to Bogota, just to Jack Headley and Roy Pollard, to get an impression of the people, the place and the club, and this would have opened his eyes to the fact that Colombia was a nation at war, a civil war that would claim 200,000 lives. Surprisingly, Neil was financially secure, as prior to his move he had been on a winning streak at the bookies in the first half of 1950, winning thousands and thousands of pounds, and his bookie offered him a share in the business that Neil turned down. That might have been another mistake, as he admitted later. He may have been a sadder man, but his love of the game had not diminished. Neil was determined to train hard, get back on the pitch, whatever colour shirt he'd be wearing. Reunited with the wonderful player Rach Carter, Neil spent his 4 months out training, watching football religiously, which whetted his appetite to return to the pitch as soon as possible, still not knowing which club would sign him. Franklin was linked to a host of clubs, and a number of English internationals went to managers and chairmen of their clubs, pleading with them to sign the best defender in the world. One of them was Tom Finney, who recollects a conversation with North End manager Cliff Britton. "I understand Neil Franklin is looking for a club. What an excellent signing it would be for us." And I couldn't believe it when Britton shrugged his shoulders, saying, "Thanks, but no thanks." And I suffered the same fate when I tried to persuade him to sign Jackie Milburn, who was leaving Newcastle. Tom said, "I talked to Jackie, who was 32, who said he'd had an offer from Ireland, that he was seriously considering, but he was a truly outstanding forward who averaged a goal every other game. The opportunity to play in the same team as Franklin and Milburn was very appealing, but Cliff Britton, who always knew best, was again unimpressed. But I thought managers should have been killed in the rush for the signatures of Neil and Jackie. To see them as unwanted men was criminal. On February 1st, 1951, Neil travelled to 2nd Division Hull City and signed for £22,500, a world record for a defender, to join Rach Carter, which was very appealing to Neil, as he rated Carter as one of the finest footballers he had ever seen. A glorious future. In his mind, Neil thought Hull City would win promotion to the First Division, but he suffered a serious knee injury and missed the second half of the 51-52 season, when he underwent a cartilage operation, which unfortunately wasn't a success. In those days, any injury like a broken leg or cartilage damage could mean the end of your career, and Neil returned to hospital for another operation on his knee, which meant he hardly played any games in the 52-53 season. He never fully recovered from his knee injury, and unable to reach his former heights of performance, he moved to Crewe Alexandra in February 56, and this was followed by brief spells at Stockport County and Mansfield Town, before accepting that his injuries had forced the inevitable, and he retired from playing football in 1957 at the age of 35. He did manage several non-league clubs before joining 3rd Division Colchester United in 62, but this wasn't a success, and he later ran a pub called the Dog and Doublet in Sandon. Memory lane for me. In October 1957, Neil left Crewe Alexandra and joined 3rd Division North Stockport County for £1,250, managed by Willie Moore, who scored for Bolton Wanderers in the famous 53 Matthews final, and this would be Neil's last season in the Football League, with regional divisions. Next season would see the 3rd and 4th divisions come into existence. And Willie Moyer was the manager when I joined Stockport in 1960. An FA Cup journey began with a first round game at Barrow, winning 2-1, and Hartlepool's in the second round, so the county progressed 2-1, leading to the third round on January 4th, 1958, against First Division Luton Town, who were in 6th place. In the Battle of the Hatters, Franklin and Company upstaged their top-flight opponents in front of 18,000 fans at Edgeley Park, when Stockport's 36-year-old centre-half picked the ball up on the right wing before whipping in a sensational cross that Arnold Jackson nodded home. Headlines were County in Wolves clothing lead Luton Sheep to slaughter. Centre forward Bill Holden, who played for Lancaster Moor Hospital in the North Lancashire League, picked up the ball near the halfway line and went on a long mazy run, beating 2 defenders before firing past a helpless Ron Bainham, England's international goalkeeper. Luton panicked and began using the long ball tactic, which played into Neil Franklin's hands because he had long been known such an approach, and he easily dealt with these tactics, especially when Luton became increasingly gung-ho, leading to Bill Holden adding a third goal to complete a 3-0 win, one of the finest displays and result in the long history of Stockport County that led to the headline in the following day's paper. The reason behind the change of strip was that Stockport and Luton shared home colours as well as away colours. The FA bemusingly decided Luton could wear their second strip, but Stockport would have to find a new kit from elsewhere, and that fine old club, Wolverhampton Wanderers, offered their strip, and so it came to be that it was in 11 Wolves shirts that the Hatters pulled off a truly historic victory. There was only one gripe from the Luton Town manager, Dally Duncan, about his team's shot exit from the cup in his post-match interview when he referred to the crucial moment 3 minutes into the game when Neil Franklin delivered that sumptuous cross for Arnold Jackson to head home. It was Dally Duncan who signed me for Blackburn Rovers in 1959 after watching me play at Craven Cottage for Lancashire. He was a really nice man who welcomed me to Rovers. A pity things didn't work out for me. What the hell is a centre-half doing down the right wing? Sunday League guest appearance. When Neil made a guest appearance at a Sunday League tournament after his retirement, he was approached by a Stoke City fan who told him he was the club's greatest ever player, greater even than Stan. Neil took praise with the same awkward appreciation that he always displayed when showered with superlatives, and it wasn't a comment he could agree with though. Stan Matthews was the greatest player I ever played with, against or saw in action, was how Neil responded. Pelé described Matthews as the man who taught us the way football should be played. As a winger in the WM formation, Stan had three main duties: to stay out wide, beat the fullback and deliver pinpoint balls into the box, and he was without peer in respect of those three tasks. Managerial failure. Neil was manager of Apoel Cyprus in 63-64, where he found himself in a land of conflict between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, and Neil found the weather and locals more hospitable in Nicosia than Bogota. But after the bloody Christmas of December 63, Apoel advised Neil that it would not be safe to stay in Cyprus and terminated his contract. Manager of Colchester United from 64 to 68, he suffered relegation and promotion, but his contract was mutually terminated at the end of the 68 season, which convinced him that management was neither a safe nor shrewd career path for him. Alf Ramsey and Neil Franklin were great friends after playing together for England, and Neil used to stay in Alf's holiday home in Spain, and they shared the same footballing philosophies. But despite their similarities, there was one significant difference between them. Ramsey was a pragmatist, whilst Franklin was an idealist. Alf learned his football in the fantastic Spurs push and run team of the early 50s, but he didn't attempt to ask Ipswich Town to play like them because they weren't as good technically, whereas Neil always tried to get third division players to play like first division professionals. Ramsey's football went on to become everything that Neil's was not. Alf's belief that it should only take 3 passes before your team was having a shot on goal, or his decision to play without wingers with England in 1968, were utterly at odds with Neil Franklin's views on the game. Neil and friends. Help needed though. Neil always kept in touch with his many friends in the game, as a look at some of the photographs will certainly confirm. Talked with Matt Busby and Joe Mercy. Bottom celebrating Stan Matthews' 70th birthday with Billy Wright. Far right sat next to Tom Finney, but I need help with some of the others. The legend and the licensee. There were 2 sides to Neil Franklin: the overconfident, composed and unflappable Neil on the football pitch, and the Neil Franklin who was charming and personable, yet reserved and typically rather awkward in the face of praise or recognition away from the football pitch. As well as there being 2 sides to him, there were 2 professions that dominated his life. The first was professional football, and the second as a licensee at multiple public houses. The 2 had overlapped in the second half of Neil's career. The first pub he took was the Blue Bell Inn, when he was followed by the Bell and Bear when he went to Crewe, both of which were based in his birthplace, Shelton, and both lasted a few years. Neil had achieved the great psychological feat of turning his back on the game that had given him a very good life for most of his 47 years, and as soon as he returned to Staffordshire, he began attending Stoke City matches, and in February '69 he joined the Pools panel, which consisted of Arthur Ellis, George Young, Rach Carter, Frank Broom, Ian McCall and Jimmy Hager, with Stan Mortensen and George Swindon joining later, and they were all handsomely rewarded for their efforts. Football fans of a certain vintage still wax lyrical about Neil Franklin, but with little surviving footage to substantiate his skill for football, quickly moved on from Franklin, Carter and Lord. Nowadays people doubt the abilities of Tom Finney, Stan Matthews, Jimmy Greaves, Dennis Law and Dixie Dean, but I haven't seen better in my life, and I'm quite happy to stand up for my heroes. The legend and the licensee. Having moved from pub to pub as a caretaker for a while, Neil became the permanent licensee of the Dog and Doublet in Sandon, Staffordshire, where Neil and Beryl settled, and it would become both his longest and last association with a pub, and it looks a wonderful pub. Patrons grew familiar with the friendly face of a footballer who they had previously watched with awe, and the pub walls reflected the illustriousness of the landlord's career with various caps, medals and sporting memorabilia on show. Franklin Dream Team. Fantasy football is a common pastime among football fans in the 21st century, but many players who wrote books usually reserved a chapter to select their own, and Neil restricted his 11 to British players and picked it in 1955, so naturally it deals only with players of Neil's generation. Goalkeeper was Frank Swift, who Neil thought was worth a goal start in any game. Don't be fooled into thinking the ball-playing goalkeeper is a modern phenomenon created by Pep Guardiola. Frank Swift was happy to play long or short, and he could kick or throw the ball with remarkable accuracy. Neil now went for two fullbacks who knew Big Swifty very well. George Hardwick, who it was said a tackle from him was like being hit by a train, and Laurie Scott of Arsenal. Both players suffered injuries in 1948 which affected their future careers. Centre half was John Charles, and in front of the back three were Matt Busby, who Neil said was a perfect footballer, cool, calculating and careful, alongside Frank Sue, a quick and thoughtful player and the only player of Asian descent to represent England. Neil didn't have a problem with the forward line. Stan Matthews on the right wing, Rach Carter inside right, Tommy Lawton centre forward, Wilf Mannion inside left, Tom Finney left wing. Franklin Dream Team. So you can see Rach Carter from the left, Nat Lofthouse, Neil Franklin, John Charles, I don't know the guy in the light suit, and then Bobby Charlton on the right. Wonderful friends. The Greats from the Golden Age of Soccer. This was the title of a book that compiled a list of dream teams and ultimate 11s from Britain's finest footballers from 1930 to the late 1970s, almost 50 years. Players who selected Neil Franklin in the best of the best player selection included Tom Finney, Jimmy Armfield, Billy Wright, Cliff Baston, Peter Doherty, Johnny Carey, Stan Mortensen, Len Shackleton, Wilf Mannion, Billy Liddell, Nat Lofthouse, Tommy Lawton and Gordon Banks. 13 wonderful players who thought that Neil Franklin was an unbelievable centre-half. All this meant that Neil took the number 5 shirt at centre-half in the overall players 11, alongside Johnny Carey, Eddie Hapgood, Danny Blanchflower, Joe Mercer, Rich Carter, Peter Doherty, Stan Matthews, Tommy Lawton and Tom Finney, whilst it was a tie between Gordon Banks and Frank Swift for the goalkeeping position, and between Bobby Charlton and John Charles as the lone reserve. Neil retired for good when he left the Dog and Doublet after 6 years in 1984, seeing out the rest of his days with his second wife Beryl, before Neil sadly died on February 9th, 1996, after suffering from Alzheimer's dementia. Neil's defection to Bogota in 1950 had a detrimental effect on his career, but it had a hugely beneficial impact on the lives of footballers for generations to come, in a journey which started with Billy Meredith and ended with Jean-Marc Bosman. Neil Franklin played a significant role in freeing footballers from restrictions over their wages and movement. When John Charles left Leeds United to earn more money at Juventus, just 7 years after Neil signed for Santa Fe, few were outraged and many more followed. Stan Mortensen describes the perfect centre-half. Neil Franklin is my ideal centre-half. Of course he plays as a stopper in the modern fashion, but he also uses the ball cleverly. For example, see how he uses the pass back to Frank Swift, who developed the trick of starting attacks from his own goal line. And with Neil, he built up a set of sequence moves. Against Scotland at Hampden Park in April 1948, the English had a bad first half, yet the Scots rarely got within shooting range of Frank because Neil kept dispossessing the opposition before slipping the ball back to Frank. This isn't as simple as it looks. To be able to carry out this play successfully, the centre-half must have ball control equal to that of an inside forward. The modern centre-half, trained only to stop an attack, is often penalised through being just clumsy, with arms flying as he goes into the tackle, not through any vicious intent, but by giving away a free kick, he puts his team under pressure. Neil, tidy, very, very skillful, and more than competent with the ball at his feet, always plays the ball and so avoids giving away those dangerous free kicks on the fringe of the penalty area. The report on the game in Glasgow said Neil Franklin played the game of his life in the 2-0 win for England. The first goal after 44 minutes came from a Franklin pass to Swift, who found Lowe, then to Pearson, and a through ball to Finney, who beat 2 defenders to score. We have to rely on others to describe Neil Franklin. Billy Wright, when selecting his dream team for the 50th anniversary of the Footballer of the Year award, had no hesitation in selecting Neil Franklin. And of course it was Billy Wright that replaced Neil eventually after 5 years at centre-half. Neil was a superb stylist with an instinctive positional sense. His international career ended when he was suspended for becoming a mercenary in the outlawed Bogota League. If Neil had been satisfied with the maximum £20 he was earning at Stoke City, he would have played for England for at least another 6 years, and I often wonder what difference that would have made to my career. Stan Matthews also rated Franklin highly. Neil won everything in the air, tackled with superb timing, and when the ball was at his feet, possessed the nous to pass it with all the guile and intelligence of the most cerebral inside forwards. An erect physique belied tremendous mobility and breathtaking speed over 5 to 10 yards. Tom Finney also selected Neil Franklin for his dream team. Neil Franklin was the best centre-half I've ever played with or against. Just before the '50 World Cup, he went to play in Colombia thinking he was going to make a bit of money, but it didn't work out for him. When he came back, the FA were furious and clubs wouldn't touch him. He was still good enough to play for England though. It was all very, very sad. In 1947-48, Neil Franklin was considered to be one of the best centre-halves in the world, and Wilf Mannion said Neil was a very confident tackler and a master header of the ball. Tom Finney, to field an England team without including Neil Franklin was basically unthinkable. I hope you enjoy this talk as much as I did in preparing it. What a fantastic player he was.